The galaxy was in chaos. For decades, the Galactic Union had been at war with the Krell, a ruthless species that valued strength above all else. The Krell had no concept of mercy, no understanding of diplomacy. They saw the universe as a battlefield, and every other species as either a threat or a resource. The Union's armies, made up of the finest warriors from 100 worlds, were losing badly. The Krell's advanced technology and brutal tactics had pushed the Union to the brink of collapse. Desperation hung thick in the air. It was in this dire moment that the Union's leaders made a decision that would change everything. They needed a new kind of hero. Not soldiers, not warriors, but something else entirely. They turned to humanity. At first, the idea seemed absurd. Humans were newcomers to the galactic stage, barely a blip in the grand scheme of things. They had no advanced weaponry, no superhuman abilities, no fleets of warships. But the Union had noticed something about humans, something strange and inexplicable. In the midst of chaos, humans had a way of bringing order. They could take the most broken systems, the most fractured societies, and somehow make them work. They were problem solvers, peacemakers, and, most importantly, teachers. And so, when the call went out for heroes, humanity sent kindergarten teachers. The first group arrived on the war-torn planet of Zorith, a once thriving world now reduced to rubble. The Krell had swept through like a storm, leaving nothing but ash and despair in their wake. The Union soldiers were dug in, fighting a losing battle to hold the line. The humans, a small group of men and women in simple, practical clothing, stepped off their transport ship and into the chaos. They didn't carry weapons, they didn't wear armor. They carried bags filled with crayons, paper, toys, and books. The soldiers stared at them in disbelief. What could these people possibly do to help? But the humans didn't seem to notice the skepticism. They got to work immediately. They set up makeshift classrooms in the ruins of buildings. Using whatever materials they could find, they gathered the children of Zorith, many of whom had lost everything, and began to teach. At first, the soldiers thought it was pointless. How could coloring books and story time possibly make a difference in a war? But as the days turned into weeks, something began to change. The children, who had been silent and withdrawn, began to smile. They laughed, they played, and as they did, their parents, the soldiers, and even the civilians who had given up hope began to take notice. The humans didn't just teach the children, they taught everyone. They showed the people of Zorith how to rebuild, not just their homes, but their lives. They taught them how to work together, how to find hope in the darkest of times. Word of what was happening on Zorith spread quickly. Other planets, other species, began to request the humans, and humanity sent more teachers. They went to worlds ravaged by war, to colonies on the brink of collapse, to places where despair had taken root. And everywhere they went, they brought the same thing: order out of chaos, hope out of despair. The Krell, for all their strength, didn't understand what was happening. They had expected the Union to send more soldiers, more weapons. Instead, they found themselves facing something they couldn't comprehend. The humans didn't fight, they didn't attack, they simply taught. And as they did, the people they taught began to fight back, not with weapons, but with unity, with determination, with a will to survive that the Krell had never encountered before. On Zorith, the soldiers who had once scoffed at the humans now fought with renewed vigor. They weren't just fighting for survival, they were fighting for the future the humans had shown them was possible. The civilians, once broken and defeated, began to rebuild their world. They worked together, inspired by the lessons the humans had taught their children. The Krell, used to crushing their enemies with brute force, found themselves facing a new kind of resistance. The people of the Union, once divided and afraid, were now united. They fought not just for themselves, but for each other. And slowly, the tide began to turn. The humans didn't win the war with weapons or armies. They won it with crayons and storybooks, with patience and kindness, with the simple belief that even in the darkest of times, there is always hope. They showed the galaxy that strength isn't just about power. It's about resilience, about the ability to keep going even when everything seems lost. By the time the war ended, the humans had become legends, not as warriors, but as teachers. They had shown the galaxy that the greatest weapon of all is the ability to inspire, to bring out the best in others. And in doing so, they had saved not just the Union, but the very idea of what it meant to be a hero. The Krell, defeated and bewildered, retreated to their own space. They would never understand what had happened, but the people of the Union would never forget. They would tell stories of the humans who had come when all seemed lost, who had brought light to the darkest corners of the galaxy, and they would remember the lesson those humans had taught them, that even in the face of overwhelming odds, there is always hope. And so, when the galaxy called for heroes, humanity sent kindergarten teachers, and in doing so, they changed the universe forever. The galaxy was in chaos. For centuries, the Galactic Union had relied on its military might, its advanced technology, and its hardened warriors to maintain order across the stars. But when the Zorathians, a ruthless species of conquerors, began their relentless march across the galaxy, the Union found itself outmatched. The Zorathians were not just strong, they were cunning. They exploited weaknesses in the Union's defenses, targeted their supply lines, and used psychological warfare to break the spirits of their enemies. Planets fell one after another, and the Union's leaders grew desperate. It was during a high-stakes emergency meeting that an unlikely suggestion was made. Admiral Krell, a grizzled veteran of countless battles, stood before the council and said, "We've tried everything. Our fleets are decimated, our soldiers are exhausted, and our technology is failing us. But there's one resource we haven't tapped yet: humanity." The council members exchanged skeptical glances. Humanity was a relatively new species in the Union. Having joined only a few decades ago, they were known for their creativity and adaptability, but they were not warriors. Their military was modest, their technology average. What could they possibly offer that the Union hadn't already tried? Not their soldiers, Krell clarified. Their teachers. Specifically, their kindergarten teachers. The room fell silent. Kindergarten teachers? The idea seemed absurd, but as Krell explained, the council began to see the logic. Humanity's greatest strength was not their weapons or their ships. It was their ability to nurture, to teach, and to inspire. Kindergarten teachers, in particular, were experts at managing chaos, fostering cooperation, and instilling discipline in the most unpredictable of beings. If anyone could unite the fractured species of the Union and turn the tide against the Zorathians, it was them. The Union agreed, albeit reluctantly, and a call was sent to Earth. Within weeks, a fleet of ships arrived, not carrying soldiers or weapons, but thousands of kindergarten teachers. They came from every corner of humanity's home planet, bringing with them their patience, their creativity, and their unshakable belief in the power of education. The first planet they were sent to was Krylos 7, a world on the brink of collapse. The Krylosians were a proud species, but years of war had left them divided and demoralized. The Zorathians had sowed discord among them, turning neighbor against neighbor. When the teachers arrived, they were met with suspicion and hostility, but they didn't come with guns or demands. They came with crayons, storybooks, and games. The Krylosian children were the first to respond, drawn by the strange, colorful objects the humans carried. They gathered around, curious and eager. The teachers smiled and began to teach. They showed the children how to draw, how to build, how to play together. Slowly but surely, the children began to change. They started to share, to cooperate. to laugh. And as they did, their parents took notice. The adults, hardened by years of war, watched in amazement as their children began to behave in ways they had never seen before. The teachers didn't just teach the children, they taught the parents too. They held workshops, showing the Krylosians how to resolve conflicts peacefully, how to work together, and how to rebuild their communities. It wasn't easy, old grudges ran deep, but the teachers were patient. They listened, they encouraged, and they never gave up. Word of the teachers' success on Krylos 7 spread quickly. Soon, they were being sent to other planets, each one more desperate than the last. On Zenther Prime, a world ravaged by famine, the teachers helped the locals organize food distribution systems and taught them sustainable farming techniques. On Valor 9, a planet torn apart by civil war, they brokered peace talks and helped the warring factions find common ground. Everywhere they went, they brought hope. The Zorathians, of course, took notice. At first, they dismissed the teachers as harmless, even laughable, but as the planets they had conquered began to rise up against them, they realized their mistake. The teachers were not just teaching, they were inspiring. They were turning the Union's weaknesses into strengths, its divisions into unity. The Zorathians tried to stop them, but it was too late. The teachers had already planted the seeds of resistance, and those seeds were growing fast. The final battle took place on Earth itself. The Zorathians, desperate to crush the source of the Union's newfound strength, launched a massive invasion, but they were met not by soldiers, but by an entire planet united. The teachers had prepared humanity for this moment. They had taught their students, young and old alike, how to stand together, how to fight not with hatred, but with courage and determination. The battle was fierce, but humanity held firm, and when the dust settled, the Zorathians were defeated. The galaxy was saved, not by weapons or technology, but by the simple, unyielding power of education and compassion. In the years that followed, the teachers returned to their classrooms, but their legacy lived on. The Galactic Union, once on the brink of collapse, was stronger than ever. The species of the galaxy, once divided, were now united, and humanity, once seen as weak, was celebrated as heroes. The story of the kindergarten teachers became legend, a reminder that sometimes, the greatest strength lies not in force, but in the ability to teach, to inspire, and to bring out the best in others. And so, when the galaxy called for heroes, it wasn't warriors or generals who answered the call. It was the teachers, the quiet, patient, unassuming heroes who changed the course of history. The galaxy was in chaos. For centuries, the Galactic Union had relied on its military might, advanced technology, and hardened warriors to maintain order across the stars. But when the Zanari crisis erupted, a conflict not of weapons, but of minds, the Union found itself helpless. The Zanari were not conquerors in the traditional sense. They didn't invade planets or destroy fleets. Instead, they infiltrated societies, spreading discord, fear, and division. Their weapon was psychological warfare, and it was devastatingly effective. Entire civilizations crumbled from within, their people turning against one another, their governments collapsing under the weight of paranoia and mistrust. The Union's generals, admirals, and diplomats tried everything. They deployed armies, enacted strict laws, and even attempted to negotiate with the Zanari, but nothing worked. The Zanari thrived on chaos, and the more the Union fought them with force, the stronger they became. Desperation set in. The Union needed a new approach, something they had never considered before, and that's when they turned to humanity. Humans were newcomers to the Galactic Union, barely a century into their membership. They were seen as primitive, emotional, and unpredictable, but they had one trait that stood out: resilience. Time and again, humans had faced crises on their own planet, wars, pandemics, natural disasters, and somehow, they always found a way to rebuild. The Union's leaders, out of options, decided to take a gamble. They called on humanity for help. But humanity didn't send soldiers or scientists or diplomats. They sent kindergarten teachers. At first, the Union was baffled. What could a group of educators possibly do against an enemy that thrived on fear and division? But as the teachers arrived on the affected planets, their impact became clear. These were no ordinary teachers. They were experts in human psychology, child development, and conflict resolution. They understood how to build trust, foster cooperation, and create a sense of community, and they applied these skills on a planetary scale. The teachers began by identifying the root causes of the discord. They studied the cultures, histories, and social structures of the affected societies. They listened to the people, not as soldiers or politicians, but as compassionate outsiders. They didn't try to impose solutions or force change. Instead, they worked quietly, patiently, and methodically. On the planet Solera, where civil war had broken out between two factions, the teachers set up community centers. These were safe spaces where people from both sides could come together, share their stories, and find common ground. The teachers organized activities that encouraged cooperation and empathy, simple things like cooking meals together, planting gardens, and playing games. Slowly, the hatred began to fade. People who had once seen each other as enemies started to see each other as neighbors. On the planet Krylos, where the government had collapsed and anarchy reigned, the teachers focused on the children. They set up schools in the ruins of cities, teaching not just math and science, but also values like kindness, respect, and responsibility. The children, in turn, brought these lessons home to their families. Over time, the chaos gave way to order, as communities began to rebuild themselves from the ground up. The Zanari, who had thrived on fear and division, found themselves powerless against this new approach. They couldn't manipulate people who were united by trust and cooperation. They couldn't spread fear in communities that were built on empathy and understanding. One by one, the planets began to recover. The Zanari, realizing their tactics no longer worked, retreated into the shadows. The Galactic Union was stunned. They had expected humanity to send warriors, not teachers, but the results spoke for themselves. The teachers had done what armies and diplomats could not. They had healed the wounds of entire civilizations, not with force, but with compassion. As the crisis came to an end, the Union held a ceremony to honor humanities. The galaxy was in chaos. For centuries, the Galactic Union had relied on its military might, its advanced technology, and its hardened warriors to maintain order. But now, faced with a crisis unlike any before, their armies were failing. The enemy wasn't a fleet of warships or a swarm of drones, it was something far more insidious. Entire civilizations were collapsing under the weight of their own divisions. Planets were tearing themselves apart from within, their people divided by fear, hatred, and mistrust. The Union's generals and diplomats had tried everything: threats, negotiations, even force. Nothing worked. The galaxy was unraveling, and no one knew how to stop it. In desperation, the Union turned to humanity. Humans were newcomers to the galactic stage, barely a blip in the grand scheme of things. They weren't the strongest, the fastest, or the smartest, but they had something unique, a knack for solving problems in ways no one else could predict. When the Union's leaders asked for help, Earth's leaders didn't send soldiers or scientists, they sent kindergarten teachers. At first, the Union was baffled. What good could a group of educators do against the tide of chaos sweeping the galaxy? But humanity insisted. These weren't just any teachers, they were the best of the best, chosen for their patience, empathy, and ability to handle the most challenging situations. They were sent to the most troubled planets, places where entire societies were on the brink of collapse. One such planet was Zender 7, a world once known for its vibrant culture and thriving economy. Now, it was a war zone. The Xantharians were divided into factions, each convinced the others were to blame for their problems. The streets were filled with violence, the air thick with anger. The Union's peacekeepers had tried to intervene, but their presence only made things worse. The Xantharians saw them as outsiders, invaders trying to impose their will. When the human teachers arrived, they were met with suspicion. The Xantharians didn't understand why these soft-spoken, unarmed humans had come, but the teachers didn't try to force their way in. They didn't give speeches or make demands. Instead, they went to the heart of the conflict, the children. In the midst of the chaos, the teachers set up makeshift classrooms. They gathered children from all factions, kids who had known nothing but fear and hatred. At first, the children were wary. They had been taught to distrust anyone outside their group, but the teachers were patient. They didn't care about the children's backgrounds or allegiances. They treated every child with kindness and respect. The classrooms became safe havens, places where the children could escape the violence outside. The teachers taught them simple lessons: how to share, how to listen, how to work together. They didn't talk about the conflict or try to push any agenda. They focused on building trust, one small step at a time. As the days turned into weeks, something remarkable began to happen. The children started to change. They began to see each other not as enemies, but as friends. They laughed together, played together, and learned together. The lessons they learned in the classroom started to spill over into their homes. They talked to their parents about their new friends, about the things they were learning. Slowly, the adults began to take notice. The teachers didn't stop there. They reached out to the community, offering to help in any way they could. They organized food drives, set up medical clinics, and even helped rebuild homes that had been destroyed in the fighting. They didn't take sides or judge anyone. They simply helped, quietly and consistently. Over time, the atmosphere on Zender 7 began to shift. The violence didn't stop overnight, but it started to lessen. People began to talk to each other, to listen. The factions started to come together, not because they were forced to, but because they wanted to. The teachers had shown them a different way, a way based on understanding and cooperation rather than fear and hatred. The Galactic Union watched in amazement as Zender 7 began to heal. They had expected the humans to fail, just like everyone else. But the teachers had done what no army or diplomat could. They had brought people together. The Union began to send teachers to other troubled planets, and the results were the same. Wherever the teachers went, they brought hope and healing. Years later, the galaxy was a very different place. The conflicts that had once threatened to tear it apart were gone, replaced by a newfound sense of unity. The Union's leaders looked back on those dark days with a sense of awe. They had thought they needed heroes, warriors to save them from destruction. But what they had needed was something far simpler and far more powerful. They had needed kindness. The teachers returned to Earth as heroes, though they didn't see themselves that way. To them, they had just done what they always did: taught, cared, and loved. But their impact would be felt for generations. The galaxy had called for heroes, and humanity had answered in the most human way possible. They had sent kindergarten teachers. And in doing so, they had saved the galaxy. The galaxy was in chaos. For centuries, the Galactic Union had relied on its military might, its advanced technology, and its hardened warriors to maintain order. But now, faced with a crisis unlike any before, their armies were failing. The Xantharians, a ruthless species bent on domination, had unleashed a weapon that didn't destroy planets or stars, it destroyed minds. It was a psychological plague, spreading fear, despair, and hopelessness across entire systems. Soldiers, no matter how brave, found themselves paralyzed by an overwhelming sense of dread. Entire fleets retreated without firing a shot. Planets surrendered without resistance. The Union was crumbling. In desperation, the Galactic Council turned to humanity. Humans were newcomers to the galactic stage, barely a blip in the grand scheme of things. But they had a reputation. They were unpredictable, resilient, and, most importantly, they had a unique ability to endure and adapt in the face of overwhelming odds. The Council didn't know what they expected when they asked for humanity's help, but it certainly wasn't what they got. Instead of soldiers, humanity sent kindergarten teachers. At first, the Council was furious. They had asked for warriors, for strategists, for anyone who could stand against the Xantherian threat. Instead, they got a group of unarmed, middle-aged women and men, dressed in colorful clothing, carrying bags filled with crayons, storybooks, and snacks. The Council demanded an explanation, but humanity's representatives simply smiled and said, "Trust us." The teachers were deployed to the front lines, to planets on the brink of collapse. The Xantherian weapon had taken its toll here. Adults cowered in their homes, too afraid to step outside. Children, once full of life, sat in silence, their eyes empty. The streets were eerily quiet, the air thick with despair. The teachers didn't flinch. They set up makeshift classrooms in the ruins of cities, in the shadow of crumbling buildings and abandoned vehicles. They spread out brightly colored mats, hung up posters of alphabets and numbers, and arranged small chairs in neat rows. They didn't try to fight the fear. They didn't try to reason with it. They simply ignored it. At first, nothing happened. The adults watched from a distance, skeptical and afraid. The children stayed where they were, unmoving. But the teachers didn't give up. They sang songs, their voices soft but steady. They read stories, their words weaving tales of courage and hope. They handed out crayons and paper, encouraging the children to draw whatever they wanted. Slowly, tentatively, the children began to respond. A little girl picked up a crayon and started to draw. A boy joined her, then another, and another. The teachers didn't push. They didn't demand. They simply created a space where the children felt safe, where they could be themselves. And as the children drew and sang and played, something remarkable happened. The fear began to lift. It wasn't immediate. It wasn't dramatic. But bit by bit, the darkness receded. The adults, watching from the sidelines, felt it too. The teacher's calm, steady presence was like a beacon in the storm, a reminder that life could be normal, that joy and laughter were still possible. One by one, they began to emerge from their homes, drawn by the sound of children's voices. The Xantherians, monitoring the situation from afar, were baffled. Their weapon was designed to exploit fear, to amplify it until it consumed everything. But here, in these makeshift classrooms, fear had no hold. The teachers didn't fight it. They didn't even acknowledge it. They simply created a world where fear didn't matter. The Xantherians tried to escalate. They bombarded the planets with more of their psychological weapon, hoping to overwhelm the teachers and the children. But it didn't work. The teachers had seen fear before. They had dealt with tantrums and nightmares, with scraped knees and broken toys. They knew how to handle it. They knew how to soothe it. And they knew how to show others that fear wasn't the end of the world. As the days turned into weeks, the planets began to heal. The adults, inspired by the teachers' example, started to rebuild their communities. They planted gardens, repaired buildings, and reopened schools. The children, once silent and withdrawn, laughed and played as if the darkness had never touched them. The Xantherians, realizing their weapon was useless, retreated. The Galactic Council was stunned. They had expected a military victory, a show of force that would crush the Xantherians once and for all. Instead, they got something far more powerful, a reminder of what it meant to be alive. The teachers hadn't fought the Xantherians. They hadn't even confronted them. They had simply shown that fear could be overcome, that hope could flourish even in the darkest of times. When the teachers returned to Earth, they were greeted as heroes, but they didn't see themselves that way. They were just doing what they had always done, caring for children, nurturing their minds and spirits, and showing them that the world, no matter how scary, could still be a beautiful place. The Galactic Union, humbled and grateful, offered humanity a permanent seat on the council, but humanity declined. "We're not warriors," they said. "We're teachers, and if you ever need us again, you know where to find us." The Xantharians, defeated but not destroyed, retreated to the edges of known space. They never attacked again. Some said it was because they had learned their lesson. Others said it was because they feared what humanity might send next. But the truth was simpler than that. The Xantharians had seen something they couldn't understand, something that no weapon could defeat, the unyielding strength of the human spirit. And so, the galaxy moved on. The planets that had been touched by the teacher's kindness flourished, their people stronger and more united than ever before. And humanity, though still newcomers, became a symbol of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there was always a way forward. The teachers went back to their classrooms, their crayons and storybooks, their songs and games. They didn't think of themselves as heroes. They were just doing what they loved. But in the hearts of those they had saved, they would always be remembered as the ones who brought light to the darkness, who showed that even the smallest acts of kindness could change the galaxy.